Good evening and welcome to our Spotlight Conversation with Bruce Springsteen, Nona Hendryx, and Lauren Onkey. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm one of the organizers of Land of Hope and Dreams, a celebration of Dave Marsh's work and vision. And it has been an amazing 5 days, I think it's been so far. And the amazingness continues this evening and also next week. And even though rock journalism and music criticism, and in the last 16 or 17 years, being a radio host have been what most people know Dave Marsh for, he is a lot more than that, just like all of us are more than what we appear on the surface. Dave has been a tireless bridge builder between audiences and performers, between music and politics. He's been a tireless champion for social justice, and all of the speakers that we've got speaking on Land of Hope and Dreams share those commitments. All of our sessions that have happened already are available on our YouTube channel. This one's also streaming to YouTube if you're not here in Zoom, able to watch it. And it will be archived on our YouTube channel, Land of Hope and Dreams 21, soon after the event is over. Before we kick things off, I've got a couple of housekeeping notes and thank yous. I'd like to thank my fellow organizers. This has been a true team effort. I'd like to thank Danny Alexander, Chris Buhalis, Charles Hughes, Susan Martinez, Lauren Onkey, Alexander Shashko, Craig Werner, and Daniel Wolf. David Cantwell's also been part of the discussion since the beginning. I'd like to thank Karen Rose for doing our social media. I'd like to thank my friend Steve Nathans-Kelly for being my Zoom advisor the entire time. And I also want to give a shout out to someone whose name hasn't come up so far in the sessions, but who should. And that's Sandy Choron, who's been Dave Marsh's agent since before Born to Run came out and is largely responsible for helping Born to Run see the light of day. So Sandy, if you're out there, a big thank you and a big acknowledgement to you. I'd also like to thank our partners, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the University of Wisconsin-Madison Afro-American Studies Department. I'm a product of that department. Some of our other organizing committee members are, and Craig Werner was a professor in that department for, I think, almost 40 years. He's also the author of A Change is Going to Come, and he's going to be introducing the panel in just a few minutes. Finally, I have to mention the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. We had an amazing panel earlier this afternoon on music and activism focusing on healthcare. And Dave Marsh and his wife, Barbara Carr, started the Kristen Ann Carr Fund almost 30 years ago in honor of their late daughter, Kristen, who passed away from a rare sarcoma. And the foundation raises funds for sarcoma research to fund sarcoma fellows who go across the country and bring care to patients who need it. So we're bringing these to you for free. And if you feel like throwing a few dollars in the way of a worthy cause, the Kristen Ann Carr Fund would be a great way to do that. We've got a link on the Land of Hope and Dreams webpage, and we also will post the link in the chat. Now, the chat will be closed tonight, but the Q&A tab will be open. If you have questions for Bruce and Nona, please type them there, and we will relay them toward the end of the discussion. So, as we've been doing with all of our panels, none of these would be possible without music. It's at the center of everything we're talking about. And so we've got messages and songs from musicians throughout the conference before each of these sessions. And tonight we've got a really terrific one. We've got a special message from Dion, and I will share that with you now.
Yo, so we're here honoring my favorite person, Dave Marsh. Dave Marsh. Hey, I'm going to tell you, if you would allow me to tell a personal story about Dave Marsh, because not only is he a great writer, a great person, a life-giving lover, a great friend, and a wordsmith, but he has great insight to the music business, connecting the dots and defining things for me. But if you'd allow me to tell a personal story, which will give you some insight from where I'm coming from. We were at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame premiering a video which the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame recorded on the Winter Dance Party, the tour that took that fatal plane crash that took Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper's life. And we were premiering that video, and Dave Marsh interviewed me to that audience that was there that night, asking questions and so on. And he said to me, Dion, in the course of the interview, he said, Dion, you're the only artist from the 50s who remained creative and relevant all these decades. And I took issue with him. I pushed back. I started arguing with him. I said, you know, you have to look at Roy Orbison, you have to look at Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis. He said, no. Convinced me that I was the only artist writing songs, making albums, 20 albums, in fact, over those decades. And he told me, he said, Dion, your music is black music filtered through a Bronx Italian neighborhood. Comes out with an attitude, yo. And he said, you're a rhythm singer. And in your very DNA, you are steeped into blues. You have an affinity with this music. It's at the center of your being. And so he convinces me of this stuff. And my wife was there. And we were talking after that presentation. And my wife said, what are you going to do about it? So I must tell you, since that presentation, I've made countless albums. The last album I made was Blues with Friends. So I got to say, Dave, thank you. Maybe at the beginning of my career, I was successful, but now, I kid you not, I am fulfilled. And those two things, those are two different things. Being successful and being fulfilled. Fulfillment is a beautiful thing. Thank you, Dave Marsh, my dear friend. I love you. I give you a big kiss. Mwah! Here goes. You might slip, you might slide, stumble and fall by the roadside, but don't let nobody drag your spirit down. No, no, we're walking up to heaven. Don't let nobody turn you around. Walk with the rich, walk with the poor, learn from everybody. That's what life is for. Don't let nobody drag your spirit down. You know we walking on the heaven. Don't let nobody turn you around. Yeah, I might say things sound strange to you. I believe in Jesus. I know it's true, but don't let nobody drag your spirit down. No, 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 people. Yeah, take it down. Some people say yes, some say no. Some just wait to see which way the wind is gonna blow. But don't let nobody drag your spirit down. You know we walking up to heaven. Don't let nobody turn you around.
Hi, I'm Craig Werner, and I'm introducing the panel. If this is the first time you've dropped in on our 3-weekend celebration of Dave Marsh, It's a little bit like showing up for an E Street Band concert just in time for the encore. You'll be glad you're here, but man, you missed something. As I've listened to the panels on Detroit and music and community and race and health and justice, my mind's kept circling back to Dave's Heart of Rock and Soul. Bob Christgau called it the best book about the 1950s, not the best music book, the best book about the 50s. I'm working on a history of the 60s, and I think it's also the best book about the 60s. What makes it so great is Dave's grasp of the magic potion of history, sound, and politics, of an energy that splits difference between Little Richard, the Supremes, and the MC5. It's the closest writing has come to capturing music in motion. As Sherry Honkel has said this afternoon, Dave's a verb, not a noun. At the center of Dave's vision is his profound understanding of the connections between musical styles, rock, soul, hip hop, country, disco, gospel, blues, connections that give us a glimmer of different ways of living together and creating a better world. And he knows that on levels that matter, musicians understand that much, much better than college professors or casual listeners. It's hard to imagine better evidence for Dave's approach than the two artists you'll be hearing in conversation for the next hour and a half. Nona Hendryx started out in one of the girl groups who were as important as the Beatles, something the Beatles knew. She rocked as hard as rock rocks with LaBelle and transformed Love Is Like an Itchin' in My Heart into a disco classic. If Nona Hendryx hasn't sung it, you can be pretty sure it either can't be sung or ain't worth singing. Our second panelist is best known as the man who lifted the title of his autobiography from Dave's first book, known as Hendrix's fellow Jerseyite, Bruce Springsteen. Tonight's moderator is Lauren Onkey, mind, heart, and soul of this set of events. Lauren recently stepped down as Senior Director of NPR Music, and she'll be joining George Washington University as the Director of the Corcoran School of the Arts this fall. Lauren?
Thank you, Craig. Welcome, everybody. Guess we transition, get everybody here. Hi, Nona.
Hi. Hi, Lauren.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hi, Bruce.
Hello, how you doing?
All right, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to Dave Marsh Fest. And, Dion woke us up there, so
Yeah,
that's
you did
great.
good.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to cover tonight: rock, race, politics, writing. But I want to start with the thing that connects Bruce Springsteen, Nona Hendryx, Dave Marsh, and me, which is I sold my heart to the junk man. So I sold my heart to the junk man, a great hit by Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, the group that Nona was in for many years, your first group, right, Nona?
Yes.
But I first hear about the song from reading Dave Marsh's book on Bruce, his book Born to Run, that listed a whole bunch of songs that you used to cover in the back. And, you know, I'm reading this list and it's like, what the hell is I sold my heart to the junk man? And then I found out what it was, heard it, and, you know, began to put together a history of rock and roll that was pretty different from what I might have been seeing in the pages of Rolling Stone, where girl groups and some of that great soul music in the early 60s was really, really foregrounded. And it reminded me that Dave was a kind of rock and roll historian. You know, he's been telling really good stories, as have both of you. So I wonder if we could start there, just about sort of, Bruce, you've covered a lot of girl group music, had people like Darlene Love and Ronnie Spector on your stage, but we could talk about the value of that era. Kind of, how do you both look back on it now as a listener and as a participant?
Hey, Nona.
Hi, Bruce.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again. It's been a minute or two.
I know.
Yes.
Well,
We're across the river from each other.
all right.
Yeah.
Well, I sold my heart to the junk man. That was, I heard the title before I heard the song. And I said, that's got to be fantastic. You know, I mean, it's just one of the great titles of all time. I Sold My Heart to the Junk Man. It's got to be a great song. And when I went and dug out the song, of course it was, you know, you guys, it was an incredible record. And this was early 70s. So I was deep into all of the Spectre girl groups and top 40 girl groups from the early 60s. And it was enormously influential as far as just the sound of those records and the youthfulness of them. You know, it was deeply influential on my music in the early 70s. Matter of fact, I think the night that John Landau wrote his famous, infamous review of me and the E Street Band with the future of rock and roll, I believe we covered I Sold My Heart to the Junk Man in Boston on that night, you know. And it was just a great song. But those were it was a fascinating moment in popular music. First of all, it was dominated by women, you know, by young women who really tore up the charts at that particular, for that brief period, sort of just pre-Beatles and post 50s rock and roll, you know. So I listened to so much of that music and was so influenced so deeply by it at that moment, as far as the sound of my records. And for years, I tried to incorporate, in the early 70s, it's like, we've got to get a woman in the band because I want to play some of this music. And it was only so far it felt like the guys could take it. But finally we did in the 80s with Patty, you know, my wife Patty. But it was just music I loved, you know. Matter of fact, I looking through, there's a tremendous cover of I Sold My Heart to the Junk Man that David Johansen and the New York Dolls did. I don't know if you've heard that one, but that's worth digging out.
Yeah, that's great. It's how interesting the relationship that for me, I've covered a lot of male singers, and you know that, and it's probably because of the range of my voice is much more comfortable for me. But that it was that amazing period. One of my favorite girl groups outside of the Shirelles, but this was the Chantels.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Maybe.
You know,
oh my God.
Yeah, and you know, but there were, we don't really seem to have that anymore. You know, that with the Ronettes and the Crystals and the oh God, there was just so many girl groups that have happened. The Dixie Cups, so that seems to have not has faded within the music business at this time. But that was a very rich song, period that a lot of, maybe the women didn't write, the young girls didn't write the songs, but they were the players.
I was just going to mention that because if you think about it, there were producers, there were songwriters, and there were singers.
Yes.
And the singers that they chose at the time were teenage girls.
Yeah.
And they had teenage voices.
Yes.
And for years I sort of pursued that sound. And I realized, even with background singers and different things, but I realized, oh, wait a minute. The reason that sound is so hard to get is because these people are all 16 and 15 and 17 years old. And your voice has a very particular sound at that moment that once you mature into adulthood just changes, you know. And so they had great writers, you know, great producers. I mean, when you think of Will You Still Carole King, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, how that defined pop music and the Shirelles for so many years.
Yes.
And the first night I ever took a drink, I saw was the group that was playing was the Shirelles down at the Osprey Bar in Manasquan, New Jersey. And I came in and they had the gold lame gowns on, and there was a tiny stage behind the bar. And they got up and they sang hit after hit after hit after hit as I downed tequila after tequila after tequila. And I thought I had one of the greatest nights of my life until the next morning. But you know, the groups were so definitive, and I think that it's just, there's an entirely different mechanism for the way groups are discovered, recorded these days, that just sort of it was just a different time and a different world. But yeah, you can't quite recreate that beautiful sound that came out of all those women at that time.
And I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, as you said, you know, the voices were young. I mean, if you listen to I Sold My Heart to the Junk Man, it's like, I sold my heart to the junk
Yeah,
man. I sold
that's
my heart
exactly.
to the junk man. It's like,
Exactly.
right, you know?
Guys are way up there.
So, you know, that's we were, Sarah was 15 going on 16. I was 16 going on 17. Patty was, I think, about the same age. So our voices were somewhere still in that teenage girl sound. Yeah. And that was the sound that, you know, the person who actually sounded the more adult was Darlene. Darlene had that husky sort of sound.
She did.
So her sound was different. And, you know, if you think about Ronnie or the Ronettes, you know, the Ronettes, their sound. And the thing that also helped that is that, you know, we would go to our manager's house in Philadelphia and we'd rehearse in his basement, like nearly every day, a cappella, rehearsing these songs. So our voices, just in terms of being able to hear each other, and, you know, a lot of what we did was that we didn't have a band, you know.
Wow.
We didn't have a band. We didn't even have a piano player. We just had voices. Wow. And then we would, you know, we would perform at the Uptown Theater or someplace with the house band or the band at the club. You know, we take our charts and go rehearsal that afternoon, and the band would learn the music, and then we would perform that night for the night or for the week. Yeah. Or, you know, at the Apollo or at the Howard Theater, any of the theaters that we played. That was the thing. You didn't have a band. You had a group.
What's fascinating about that is that really came to the front when you did the record with Laura Nyro.
Yeah.
You could hear the roots of all of that a cappella singing that came forward on that record, which is one of my favorite records. I've played it on my radio show, and it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous record of harmonies, you know. But the distinction that you make between Ronnie and Darlene is actually quite fascinating. And I never thought about that before, that Darlene's voice never really sounded like a teenager. She always had a full-throated adult sound, you know, where Ronnie always, part of her feature was that she had that very sort of youthful voice. You know, that's a fascinating distinction between, it made those records very different.
Yeah, you know, that's something that I love. I love you know, voices and singers, and, you know, but you know, I listen to someone like Baby Washington. You know, she was that kind of sort of more alto voice. Did the songs that fit those voices was very different than the songs that would fit, say, you know, a Diana Ross or someone like that, because it was just the quality of the voice. When you hear it, you don't want to put certain words or certain melodies around it. And, you know, Ruth Brown or Etta James, or, you know, these were voices that they were shouters. Baby Washington wasn't. She was a smoother crooner, but, you know, Ruth Brown, Etta James, they were like, you know, they would blow your ears off.
Oh yeah.
They were real strong voices. So there is that thing that for music and how that period that the girl groups really had that glorious time. And it would be nice to see that again. But I think it's harder to do today.
Well, I think what it was the naive romanticness of those records would be hard to recapture, you know, in these days. And that's really what attracted me. And that was really the element that I pulled into my own music, was just they were just romantic records, and they had drama and tension, and certainly, and particularly the records that Phil Spector made, they had that, you know, it sounded like they were the last records you were ever going to hear, and the world was going to explode. And I loved that apocalyptic grandeur of so many of those, certainly the Ronettes and the Crystals records, and of their day. But there was something in the romanticness that I think would be very hard to recapture today. The innocence.
Yeah,
the innocence.
Yeah, you're right. It was an innocence, because you can't sing about like knocking boots today, or whatever the phrase is. that is the current phrase about romance, because the naivety has gone away, and that was something when you mentioned Laura's Gonna Take a Miracle album, because Laura also loved the music of that time and girl groups, and that's how that came about. We would sit around Laura's, go over. Patty would either fry chicken, make some potato salad, which Laura loved, and we'd sit around and sing, and Laura would play the piano, and that's how that album came together.
How did you hook up?
Through Vicky Wickham, who managed LaBelle, and also a friend of Laura's, Peter Dallas, who was a good friend. And we sort of got to know Laura, and she became really, really friendly with Patty, to the point that they went on vacations together, and and they just, actually Laura was with us so often, she was like the fourth LaBelle.
Oh.
She would come, she would, put on our pajamas, sing, eat tuna fish sandwiches. It was, that's how that came about. And then Gamble and Huff, basically, Patty bet Leon Huff he bet Patty that we couldn't sing all those vocals in one night.
Wow.
And Patty doesn't lose a bet.
So you telling me you did all that in an evening?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Well, we'd been singing around the piano with Laura, like, so it was not like, come learn this, do this. It was like, okay, press record.
Wow.
Such a beautiful record. And I think that girl group, that girl group sound didn't have a lot of respect that's one of the interesting things, Bruce. I think that you're playing it when you were, because it's not like that was really common in rock, for a rock guy like you to be sort of mining girl groups was really startling, I would say, for me as a listener. And, it's one of the things that Dave really brought out. And it took the Shirelles a long time to get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, now the Ronettes got in and Darlene got in, but it was music that in some ways got defined as not rock, which, doesn't make sense, right? There's so many different things that are under that umbrella of rock and roll. And I think it's interesting because at the moment you're covering some music like that, Nona, you're with Patty and Sarah, you're taking a whole different, you're trying to redefine what a girl group is, right? But still very much rock. And was the Gonna Take a Miracle album the first thing you did as LaBelle?
No, we had an album on Warner Brothers, just called LaBelle, and that was the first thing first album we released as LaBelle, and then I think we'd already released Revolution Will Not Be Televised, the second album.
Because you guys are pushing against the whole girl group strictures, right? Matching.
Oh yeah. We've taken off the wigs, taken off the matching, lovely gowns and tiaras, and waving our hands back and forth, in that syncopated kind of way that we did. And also we configured from being, the lead singer up front and the 3 backing or 4 backing singers on the side over here. And we were, really in the singing songs where people took different leads within the songs. And I started writing for the group, and I'd write songs so that they were like these mini operas, so we could play against each other and tell a story in the kind of acting way. But we were not, we took off the wigs, had afros in the beginning, and a lot of our pictures, and we were really not wearing, we were wearing, I don't know, so like homemade clothes basically. I don't know what you want to call them. And the gowns were gone, all that stuff was gone, and we were playing the bitter in, performing like on while people were like right there eating, and singing songs like We Won't Get Fooled Again. And we started mining a lot of the rock, what was considered rock music canon, and bringing our gospel, R&B, blues influence to the music.
Bruce, did you have a sense in the 70s when you were doing things like Cupid and Then She Kissed Me and songs like that, were you thinking of them as oldies? Were you, as you were kind of grabbing songs like that?
Songs. They were just songs that I loved, and I really, I think at that moment caught me in the middle of me being a real student on studying the earlier pop music from the 60s and late 50s, but in truth, the early 60s actually influenced me a lot, and partly it was just because the writing was so good on so many of those songs, and the structures of them were so good. They were just such great productions and pieces of work, and so I was just more influenced by those things than I was by the music that was present at the moment, or by the music that was popular in, say, the late 60s, the sort of psychedelic music that I had a phase of that when I was younger. And so I kind of passed through it by the time I got a record deal, and I kind of been through my heavy guitar playing, psychedelic blues, I kind of passed through all that, and what coincided with my record deal was sort of me becoming a student of rock and roll and rhythm and blues and soul in general, and it was just music that I loved and songs I wanted to sing, and I thought that we could represent in a way that that music would make sense to the audience, the young audience that was coming to see us at that time. There was just so much beauty in it, so much beauty in the craftsmanship and in the voices. The voices were so incredible, and we just aspired to that sort of pop beauty. It was just something that just to this day, it's still music I listen to quite often.
Because it seems like a lot of those songs at that moment would have been hard to hear, maybe, right? Like it's not like YouTube existed where you could just say, oh, the artist I like is playing this song, so I'm going to go find out where it came from. Like, where were you going to hear, I don't know, Sam Cooke in 1975 on the radio if you were a kid?
It was a little pre the oldies, or actually, no, it was just around the oldies, the first oldies boom, which was early 70s, where Chuck Berry suddenly and Jerry Lee Lewis were suddenly recognized as masters.
Yes.
And those groups were suddenly reappreciated again as artists and masters of their genres. So you began to have an oldies radio, but there was a little kiosk underneath Port Authority that was down in the basement where the subway was, that sold nothing but 45s, and they were all repressed from the 50s and 60s. So anything that I wanted to get, I would go to this guy's little tiny kiosk down in the subway, and I was just going every week, constantly buying up 45s, 45s, and I just brought them home and played them to death. So that was where I was digging the stuff up from, was you could find it. It was being, those records were being repressed, and I found, and I don't remember the name of the place, but it was, for years I went there, and that's where that's where I found all my records that I studied and that we then attempted to cover as best as we could for Five Guys,
But there was also radio, WBLS was
Yeah.
There were, there was radio, so you could still hear, like, there were people like Frankie Crocker, Bob,
Right.
People who played. They didn't, this was when DJs could make their own playlists,
Right.
and there were shows like that, so you could hear music that for some people they felt maybe it was of the past, that hadn't come into the 70s and the sort of British invasion. But you also you recognize that the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, but specifically the Stones and the Beatles, I mean, they were highly influenced by this music as well.
Yeah.
Covered it
And
formed it.
No, I always say, not only were these bands some of the greatest writers in the world, they were several of the best cover bands you'd ever heard.
Yes.
And all the things that I heard the Beatles do, I then went back and found the original Motown records and soul records from the folks that did it first. And the same thing with the Stones. I went back and I found all the great blues records, but I did hear them first as a 14-year-old kid when the British invasion hit. And then I went back and studied all the original records,
Yeah. So I think, just depending, for some people, maybe they didn't because of where they lived, they didn't get a chance to hear. But luckily, I think along the East Coast, you were still getting to hear a lot of the music that had come before. You had, and specifically like somebody like Murray Decay, and his his shows that he would do, but also his radio and his, so there were people who were still, that was the music. That was the music that he loved, right? And what you said, Bruce, about, you were, playing music that you loved, that's the thing. I think that's what we all do, is that we fall in love with a kind of music or sound or instrument, and that becomes the passion, and it leads you to all these other places that this music has come from, right?
Yeah, and then it eventually leads you to your own identity, how you take all those elements and process them and finally find yourself in them, and then represent them through your own music and your own visual style. And so they were very, very important records to me in my early 20s.
I've spent a lot of, when we started, because you're a few days younger than me, Bruce, I have to say, a few years younger than me, but we played a lot on the Jersey Shore, down in Atlantic City. There used to be down there, I forget the Geeter with the Heater,
Jerry Blavitt.
Jerry Blavitt.
The Geeter with the Heater, and they had shows down on the pier in Atlantic City, and
that's right.
We would perform down there, but also along the Jersey Shore there was a club called the Wildwood Club, and we did shows with like the Platters and people like that. They were kind of a part of we were the teenagers and they were the adults, so they were they were moving on to,
Yeah.
they had so much success. And that was really also, again, the proving ground for us that we were playing with these people like Dinah Washington and, you know, Jerry Butler and the Impressions and people like that, who were just really such amazing talents, or on
Wow.
stages with Sam,
Yeah.
or, you know, any of the, you know, touring with James Brown. You know, if
Wow.
you don't learn how to be a good performer when you're touring with James Brown, you better hang up your shoes, right?
That's right.
So so a lot of what, you know, that time, that was so really like a, you know, an education, really, a fertile time when all of these artists were at their height, like Jackie Wilson, you know.
Oh,
These are, so that music that we're talking about, that that influenced us, and that comes from all these different places, I do hold under the umbrella of whether it's, you know, the label rock and roll, you know, pop, you know, it's music that I think that we fall in love with. It's not a label.
sure.
Right?
What year did LaBelle, what year did you guys first start working?
We started as Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells in 61.
61. Wow. Yeah.
61. And then we became LaBelle in 69, 70.
Ah,
Yeah. So we'd seen a few stages by that time.
really? Really? Just in those 9 years, you know, that's a lifetime in and of itself.
Absolutely.
You know? I envy the fact that you got to play alongside some of those performers. Jeez. That's incredible.
Yeah, you would have loved it. I mean, we were like, you know, a kid in a candy store.
Yeah.
Being able to watch from the side of the stage, Sam Cooke, or
Oh my God.
any of these, you know, amazing talents, Solomon Burke.
Oh Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, you know, Screaming Jay Hawkins. I mean, just in the Temptations, you know, to be on the like play, and because we played theaters, so we played the Howard Theater, the Royal Theater, the Regal Theater, the Apollo Theater, you know, but you were there for like a week and doing 2 and 3, 4 shows a day. So you would get to see Little Anthony and the Imperials and people do
Sure.
show several times in a day.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, I miss that. I miss that camaraderie of, you know, spending that kind of time in a space with artists, and, you know, really kind of getting to know each other. Because, you know, I miss
those
that.
package shows must have been wonderful, you know.
Yeah.
And I think getting those
wonderful and sometimes frightening. No, I'm saying
sometimes frightening.
Right. Well, yeah, you know, touring on the Chitlin circuit could be, you know, harrowing.
I'll bet.
Yes.
Dangerous, right?
Yeah, in the South, you know, we were run out of a few places, you know, not wanted. You know, it was very much the Green Book.
Right.
In terms of where you could stay, where you could eat, you know, and you know, you did that because you could run into trouble, which we did a few times, and you don't want to have that happen, especially back then. Yeah.
And those are the stories about the music, you know. I mean, to mention Dave here, that I think he's really been always committed to bringing out, right? I mean, not only a sort of broad, inclusive story of the music, but a history of the music that's, you know, that we need to understand within American history too, right? And the actual living, breathing conditions that musicians were going through wherever they were. As you're talking about camaraderie and groups of people, though, and I don't know if this is going to feel like a weird transition, my brain goes to another point of connection between you guys, which is that you're both on Little Steven's Sun City record in 1985, both the record and the video, which, you know, one of the mind-blowing things about that record is, you know, there's so many hip hop artists on it. You've got, you know, Eddie Kendricks and David Ruffin and Darlene and Bruce, you're sort of, and you're Born in the USA rocket ship and Bono. Right. And it's like, oh my God, you know, the cross genres on that record. Any memories either of you have about recording of the record or the making of that video out in the street in 1985?
Well, Steve wasn't in the band at that time, and he just told me he was doing this big project that was anti-apartheid, you know. So, and he said he had a line or two for me to sing if I wanted to be a part of it. So I said, sure. And, you know, when Steve put something together, the washing machine, the kitchen, everything is in there. Any kind of, you know, everything was going to be in. And that's also how he views the world and his musical tastes, you know. It was an amazing creation, and its inclusiveness was way kind of ahead of its time, you know. And all I remember was the day we spent in New York. I sang with David Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks, yes, which of course was a dream, you know. I mean, I still look back, you know, they both passed now, but they were obviously two of the, you know, the most incredible soul singers, you know, with the Temptations. And so I just sort of had my fun in my little corner with Eddie and David, and Steve was just, he had it all going on, you know.
Yes, but that's you know, those kinds of records are difficult because, you know, you can spend like, you know, probably more hours doing the recording that you did, and it's like you've got like 2 lines because you got to try and get everybody in the mix.
Yeah.
And which is that's how that happens, and that's how it works. But, you know, also doing the video really, I think, helped a lot because we did get to spend time with each other, and it's when I really got to know Bono and different people, and I got to see some people I hadn't seen for a long time, like Eddie and David, and then Africa Bambaataa, you know, the different people that
right.
Some of the younger hip hop people who were just coming up, you know, but that's the thing about music, right? That music, the people who make music, if you go like to Stax Records, or, you know, people think, oh, that's Al Green, or, you know, but the people who played on those records are not all people, Black people or people of color. You know, people who write the songs are not, you know, so the music is that thing that brings people together, you know, from anywhere.
Yeah.
That, you know, if you love it and you want, you know, somebody, you know, you love somebody's work that they do and you want to work with them, you don't care.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of the things, you know, Bruce, that you've done in terms of working with just so many different people, and the you know, to bring the social, the political statements into the music, because it does move and change hearts and minds, because it can do it in a way that isn't, people don't feel, I don't know, you can reach people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and I have to say, you know, you have stepped up so many times to do that. You know, and maybe it's just where you come from. I think it's part of where I come from, that music is, yes, it's love, it's affection, it's all those things, but it's also something that can change, and it's been proven it can change the world, right?
Well, it's interesting. I always viewed even popular music and a lot of rock and roll and rhythm and blues. And so I just viewed it as liberation music. It's music of liberation. It frees your soul. It frees your body. It frees your mind. Well, there's so much, if you take all that to heart, it's going to eventually lead you into a social movement of some sort and into politics of some sort, I mean, it doesn't have to be, your music doesn't even particularly have to be directly political, were there more revolutionary artists than James Brown? I don't really think so. Look at the influence he has on popular culture to this day, or Elvis. Elvis. So I mean, so they were very world changing, culture shaping artists whose work altered society in deeply important ways, who increase freedom for young people and people of all ages, really. And so I always just sort of looked at the social element of the music that we made as a natural extension of the music itself. That was just some place where it took me. And also perhaps because I saw myself as being came from blue collar working class community, and I sort of broke through that wall, and I felt like, I guess that leaves me with some responsibility here. And so I sort of came at it from that angle also, like what with that visibility and with those ears, what responsibility comes with that, and you can say, well, really, you're just, there's the responsibility to entertain, to give people some joy in their lives and get their feet dancing, but you also have the opportunity really to contextualize the issues of the day. That can be, if you choose to have that as a part of your music, you can, and follow that where it leads. And so we've done all kinds of things. We play all kinds of music during the night of our show. Some of it has political implications, some of it doesn't have direct political implications, but it was just a very natural sort of progression and trail to follow for me. I wasn't a particularly political person. I didn't grow up in a political household at all, and so it really was just me following my instincts and but you did that in LaBelle also,
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't grow up in a political household either. It's not. We were busy trying to stay alive, get something.
Yeah,
to,
that was my house too.
Yes. So it wasn't, but but being a part of something like Sun City, and being aware, I think as you grow up and you can become more aware about the world, and I think traveling is a part of the education that we get, or for me, that I was able to have by beginning to go to Europe very early, like within our year, and performing in Germany and the army bases, and going to England, going to Scotland, so you begin to see, the world differently. And
that's fascinating.
Yeah, and also the European, approach, or people were much more politically active.
Yeah.
Than in America, or that at least the people.
Very much. Well, it's interesting because our first European real tour, which was in the early '80s, affected a lot of the band. It's something about being outside of the United States. You're when you look back at it from overseas, it looks different. you know, and you're experiencing people in other countries with different priorities. When we did the Amnesty International tour and we toured through South America and Africa, politics were really at the front of the line. When we did our press conferences, it was all based around, you know, these were countries where politics were life and death measures at that moment, you know, where it hadn't been long, you know, Pinochet was still in Chile. What hadn't been long since the people disappearing in Argentina had, you know, and so all of these things were right on the front burner, and we learned that, and the sad, you would come back to the United States, and our press conference there was sort of filled with People magazine questions, you know, and it was like, you really noticed the difference, and it was an enormous difference between Europe and Central America and South America and the United States. And so you know, a lot of, I know Steve was activated politically by that, specifically by our 80-81 tour in Europe, when he really saw the United States from a different perspective. I felt it also, you know.
Yeah,
Bruce, were your politics influenced by Dave at all, as you kind of tried to figure out how to maybe work more activism into your performances? Did Dave Marsh play a role in there for you?
I don't know. You know, I think that kind of, that came around sort of as a result of my early success, you know, and where I was sort of like, what do I do with this? You know, it was just that was my first question. My first question was sort of, okay, I'm going to break through all of this and transform myself into something else, into another life, into another way of living. But once I've done that for myself, what do I do with it? How does it matter to anybody else? How is it relevant to the people I've grown up with and where I live? And I still lived in New Jersey. And I was very close to all my, so really I just followed an instinct, you know. It wasn't like I was reading something that made me politically, you know. I think the first book that sort of stirred my political consciousness was Woody Guthrie Life by Joe Klein. And that was sort of something that sort of steered me in a direction where I said, okay, Woody Guthrie had an approach to this that was, I might be able to incorporate some of this in some of the music that I do. So to answer your question, no, I don't believe Dave had anything to do with it, you know, but we were all friends at the time, and it was all just discussions and ideas, and things were all going around and around and around. So it was really through everyone you were making contact with at that very critical moment of your career and your work life, where you were really beginning to shape your identity and who you were and what you were going to do in your future.
I think there were also at that time, you know, to defend Dave, since he didn't influence you, Bruce. There were writers, there were critics, there were people who took it very seriously, and not to the point of like, seriously, I'm going to criticize these people, but really it was their love of music that brought them into journalism in music. And they really would, you know, there were people that I would read, and I would get something out of what their review of music, that they were not just reviewing it from the point of view of they like it or they don't like it, but they would actually talk about the lyrics, and specifically more after the Beatles, because you know, especially when the Beatles got beyond, you know, I love you, yeah, 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 and moved into the more sort of the latter albums, the White Album, the albums that had really deeper. Eleanor Rigby, what is that song? Right? She keeps her face in a jar by the door. It's like, okay, can we talk about that? Those lyrics, and some of the other lyrics that artists began to write. So I think the critics and the people who became music journalists, I would say, they were writing about the storytelling within songs, as opposed to, this pop song is a better pop song than that pop song.
Yeah, and there was also, there was an attempt by that initial group of rock critics to sort of, what does all this mean?
Yeah.
What I mean, because it was so culture. It's, because R&B and soul and rock and roll music was so much the center of the cultural conversation in the 60s and 70s, and certainly through the 80s. What is this voice? What does it mean? What is this move? It was a movement. It was a legitimate movement, a legitimate social movement, with practically religious overtones. Was how intensely people took their music. People took their music personally and deeply, and it just dug deep into your soul, and you had a religious passion about it. So what is this tremendous force, and what does it mean in each and everyone's life? And I was a reader of Cream magazine. Initially, I read all of the rock magazines when I was a kid. Anything that had any music in it, I bought, and I made my way through, and I met Dave and John on the exact same night. They were together coming into my show in Boston at I think it was Charlie's place, but when I met them, I was literally standing outside reading a review of my record by John Landau, and so the first words I think I had with John was, he said, "What do you think?" And I think I said, "Oh, it's not too bad," and he said, "Well, I'm the guy that wrote it," and then Dave was with it, and I met Dave, and they came in and watched the show with about 20 other people, which is all there was in the club that night, on a rainy Boston night.
Lucky them.
But they were intense. They were two people who were very intense about, once again, they loved music, they loved rock and roll, and they were just, their intensity matched mine as far as how serious we were taking what we were doing, and so they were important friends, very, 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 very important meeting, and important friends all through that my earliest days as a record maker.
Yeah, there were a lot of specifically out of England as well, a lot of music journalists and music magazines, the NME magazine, the Melody Maker, and they could pretty much kind of make or break your career back then. That if you were to Europe, or I forget the name of the one in France, it was the journalists who wrote for those papers were very important, or those magazines were very important arbiters of what was coming, who was doing, because there wasn't, especially in England, you did have pirate radio that came about. But before that, the BBC had a lockdown on, had it all the airwaves locked up, and young people that, again, this is a period when young people began to have more pocket change, more money. And and with that, there grew this power that not only was supported or propelled music and artists, but also the voice of having a political voice, to the point that you could actually make a change through music, through the whole thing of Woodstock, and people saw that the strength and power of a younger generation that was willing to say, you know, I don't think like you think. You know, this Black person over here is my sister or my brother. This Latino person over here is, or they didn't even use those terms probably, but you know, people just were, changes were, I think, simple.
Oh yeah.
Change is going to come. Change is
Yeah.
coming, right?
Absolutely. You know, absolutely. And I think rock writers in those days, people would have a hard time imagining how influential that was compared to today. You know, there's just so much out there now that, but at that time in the 70s, I know we were supported primarily by rock writers for the first two albums. We made bombed. They didn't go anywhere. And so the only support we had some radio support, but we had a lot of critical support.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really, really essential at that time. You know, it really, and it meant a lot to you if you were struggling and you were riding in your car 13 hours a night with 6 other guys, and you know, it was something that really kept you going, and it was really a big part of the conversation. Rock writing in the 70s and early 80s and 60s, you know, really was an enormous part of the conversation of music at that time, and was incredibly influential in my work life. I ended up with a rock critic as my manager, you know, and
very influential. Yes.
You know, ended up as my and really, you know, there's a lot of rock writing that pretty much kicked off a certain part of my work life, you know.
Yes.
So it was very, very influential. Dave and John and Bob Christgau and Lester Bangs and Greil Marcus, they were all, you know, incredibly influential at that time.
The writers could situate the work, you know, as you were a reader, as you were a fan, right? The writers were situating the work with other ideas, right? Like, so, you know, I would read something because I was a fan of LaBelle or I was a fan of Bruce, and then somebody would make a reference to another writer or a philosopher, or I mean, those writers were consuming ideas and they were mixing it all together. And what was cool for me was that it didn't make rock and roll like have to live up to a poet or a philosopher. It treated rock and roll and a poet as the same, as equally important culture. And that just felt like that made my mind explode. And writers, you know, your records did that. And the writers did that too. It felt like a big swirling kind of dialogue of the arts in a way that broke down any sense of like elite. You know, I think the best music writers did that.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, well, I think there was something about, like you say, it people, like I said, what does this mean? You know, what's the this whole sort of, you know, like Nona was saying, young people had an enormous economic power that was previously unheard of at that particular moment. Young voices were being, you know, culturally heard, coming from everywhere, and it was just a moment of profound change, and I think the symbiosis between musicians and the people who were writing about musicians at that time was at its peak.
Yes.
You know, so it's just a fascinating and unique moment that we're not going to see again.
Yeah, you reminded me that when you said about the 20 other people in the club, my direct experience with how influential a journalist or a writer can be, a music journalist. So I was booked to play a club in Canada, in Toronto, Canada, called The Edge. And I went and I was doing 2 shows a night. and we're doing the first show, and it was for the bartender and two other people. And
Yeah.
luckily, one of the two other people was a journalist for music for the Big Toronto newspaper, and because that person loved what I did that night, because I didn't go like, oh well, I'll just fluff it off because it's only the bartender and two other people, and I think one of the other people was Vicky, my manager, and and he wrote, and the rest of the week it was sold out for
No, that's incredible. But that was the power of that, rock writers had, similar to theater critics today, I suppose, that there was they wrote about, people came out to see what someone was talking about. And in a day when people had to pay to hear music, you had to pay just to hear the music.
You had to leave your home, put gas in your car, buy a ticket.
I mean, people couldn't hear an album unless they paid to hear it,
Exactly.
with the exception of what they might hear on the radio, know. So it was just a different time.
Very different. I was talking to somebody about, talking with you and talking about music. And, as I was saying earlier, we're doing this project, and we're, some of the young students are reimagining Laurie Anderson's music. And so they were saying, well, what do you think? Would you want, ask Bruce, what does he think about people covering his songs and what they do to it? I mean, what do you...
I'm the more the merrier. I love to hear anybody cover any of my songs. Whether I like it or not, I just love to see somebody do it, take a swing at it, So I love that. I love seeing, I love, somebody taking your thing and running it through whatever they hear and seeing what comes out,
Yes.
You know what I was thinking of recently when thinking about both of you, and the Sun City record, was Arthur Baker, who worked with both of you. And Bruce, those remixes that you and Arthur did of your Born in the USA singles, I mean, it's just wild. It's so creative, and he just took, and you see this other mind, and thinking about the dance floor in your work, the audience didn't know what the hell to do with it in a way, but you just saw this creative, mad genius behind the console.
Yeah, Arthur was, I like some of the things he did, and some of them have stuck, and occasionally I'll hear a little piece of kind of come out from the audience, it's a vocal part or something, but it was it was a fascinating moment for us, because it was right there in 84 and 85 when we sort of had we had that explosion in popularity, and that was the beginning of video television. So that was new. Remixes were new. All of these things were suddenly out there for you to choose from, and we were taking a swing at it.
It's fun. I know that the audience has some questions, and we have a few minutes left to get a couple of those in.
Okay.
Fast.
Danny, are you going to pop in here?
I am popping in.
There you go.
Yes.
Hey, Danny.
Hi. This has been a great conversation. Hi, and we've had a record number of comments. There's been plenty of things. To start with something kind of Dave Marsh centric here, and you were on this a little bit, but this question says, Dave Marsh and John Landau were not just music critics, but also doing social critique. What is the role of the music critic today? With the internet and social media, is there a role for a music critic, a social critic today? Or is everyone a critic today?
It seems like everyone's.
Want to take a swing at it, no?
I'll swing first. Hopefully I'll get on first base. Everybody's a critic today, but there are people that I still, either watch or read or, check for what temperature they're taking to see, and especially people who are adventurous and willing to, bring out someone that not everyone's looking at, and so to say,
Yeah.
we should have a look at this, check this person out. So I think there's a role to play because it's because there is so much. I think there's a role
Right.
for people who are really passionate about the music, live, breathe, and eat it.
Yeah.
There's a young guy named Christian Wakane who, Christian just is music crazy, and he in all kinds of music, and he studies, he can talk about it, he can tell you who's playing on something, who's doing what, but he's also seeks out new artists and tries to uplift them, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a place.
Yeah, I mean, I buy music from reading reviews to this day. I mean, I still read. I will read a lot of different. I'll read the magazines that are out there, whether it's Mojo, Uncut, or I still read Rolling Stone, or I'll go online and it's Pitchfork or whatever, and I will buy music where I read a review that intrigues me. I'm not familiar with as familiar with the individual writers and their own personas and point of view as I would have been with the guys that sort of I came up with, and I'm still interested in their writing, Greel or Dave or what, and their opinions about sort of what's going on out there. I'm still kind of attached to the guys that were around when I started out, but I will go out and buy music that I've read reviews about. So I think that's still alive and well, but you're right. Everybody is a critic. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Everybody's got one.
That's right.
And it's happening on a bunch of platforms, right? So there's people doing really good work in podcasting. There's people doing good work on video. There's people that are using Twitter in really creative ways and commenting on the day-to-day. But like anything else, right? It's like, how do you make a living as a writer? Where are the outlets? I mean, will people pay for music writing? Like they'll pay for music. It's a similar kind of
if they won't
challenge.
pay for the music, I doubt they're going to pay for the music writing.
Right?
So that's my guess.
I think that's a good theory, Bruce. Yeah.
Well, it started where this all started. It wasn't pay for play. People started making music because they had to, wanted to. It was in their blood, right? So
that's right.
Yeah, I have to take that on board as well. Though I do like getting paid. It's not a bad habit to have. But I have to recognize that, in certain other cultures, like music is just part of the culture. And it's nobody, it's like you want a contract? Why would you want a contract?
Yeah.
I think great writers are the same too, Nona. Like I think somebody like Dave, he writes because he has to.
Yeah.
There's a passion and a drive as a writer there.
Yeah, Dave's connection to musicians, music, just was as deep and as passionate as like I said, I connected to Dave because I knew he felt about music the way I felt about it. It was life sustaining. It was central to your existence.
Yeah.
And what it meant and what it could say and what it could do for people and for you, for your inner life, for the way that you walked through the world, through the choices you made, through your politics, through it really was a part of assisting you in defining your whole being and all of Dave's writing. And Dave's been so supportive of me over the years. I have to take a moment and just thank him for his love and support and the place that he's played in my work and in my work life. He's been really central and essential, and so he's been a very important figure just for me, and a companion as I've made my way through you know, through the forest of wherever popular music has taken me. And so love you, Dave.
As I say, Dave, you know, the music side, but Dave is the only person who said to me, you should run for president.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I love Dave.
That's good.
That sounds like a Rock and Rap Confidential campaign.
Exactly. Yes. Do you have another question?
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, we have a two-part one about education. I think it's interesting because of your involvement in education, Nona, in particular. But so we've got Ivan Hecht mentioned that he became a teacher because of Bruce. But of course, Bruce once said the educational system is set up for a specific type of kid and not the one who thinks outside the box. And I kind of want to ask both sides of this, and then you can each answer. So do those experiences and viewpoints about education influence your writing today, Bruce? And then with Nona, it's your bio says you dreamed of being an educator because of an English teacher and educator, Lottie Dinkins, Mrs. Lottie Dinkins. Mm-hmm. And you founded sistersmatter.org to bridge the gap in science, math, art, technology, and robotics. That's STEAM instead of STEM, right? For young women of color. Can you talk about the role music plays in education and helping girls connect to the STEM part of that? So do you each want to say a few words about education? Take on it.
Want to go for it, Bruce?
Sure. Feel like yeah, my relationship with education is mixed, you know, in that it's all caught up in sort of it's caught up in my religious experience because I went to Catholic school for 8 years, and then I went to public school in Freehold. And I guess what I would say is while I do believe that the system is built for inserting sort of, you know, is built for a certain kind of person. The other thing that I do know is that the teachers who reached out to me, and there were a few, made an enormous difference in the way that I responded and thought about my own life. I had an English teacher, Mr. Hussey, in Freehold Regional High School, who made a simple effort to include me in the discussions in class and had a way of treating literature that gave me a certain kind of respect for him and for it, and led me in the direction of what I would call creative writing. In my brief stay at college, I had a good creative writing teacher who really encouraged me to write, And so those things were, I think every individual educator out there has it within their power to deeply influence, the students who come through their classroom.
Yeah, I am a huge, teachers. I don't understand why they're not held in more esteem in our society, because to me they're on the same level of what used to be the Greek philosophers, and people who help, they help shape the minds, and those who are really good really do reach out to students and see in a young person what they're thirsty for and try to help guide them towards it, or open up some possibility, or just be able to find that spark in someone that turns on the light and lights a fire inside of them. And that to me is, what Mrs. Dinkins did for me through poetry. I don't think I'd be sitting here tonight if she had not taken that interest in this scrawny little Black girl from, South Trenton in Trenton, New Jersey, from basically what at the time was considered a ghetto, and start, having me read Tennyson and, all this sort of, Shakespeare and begin to help me in terms of like writing my own or doing sort of my kind of public speaking and getting on the debating team and things like that. That I don't think I would sit here today if her influence, if I hadn't had her influence. So that is why I still, when people ask me, I wanted to be an educator. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to teach, either English or ancient history was the other thing I was really interested in. So, I think it's one of an area in our society that is just the people who do the work of educating youth, really the support that needs to be there for them from in every area, financially to all the other areas that they would need support in, needs to be here. I'm on my soapbox now, so
go girl.
on my soapbox here, and because it's just so important that for young people who are developing, trying to find their way in life, to if there's nowhere else, nobody else is going to be able to be that safety net, that the school, the system, maybe, yes, there are those who know, like, I'm going to be a scientist, and they become a scientist. Then there are those who are trying to be shoved into being a scientist, who really just want to be some sort of creative Banksy or whatever out there in the world. And they need to be supported as well. So I think there's a lot to be dealt with, and the teachers are the people who need to be brought into the conversation to do that.
Yeah, which is, that points at Steve's work, right, with Teach Rock and of course you all are teachers. Yeah,
I was just going to say that same thing, Danny. You've hit your goal, Nona, and I have to say, as a 12, 13-year-old girl, when I saw you in the silver lame spacesuit, it taught me a lot.
More from a 3-minute record.
It taught me a lot. That taught me more than any feminist theory I ever read in graduate school, right? Thank you both so much. What an incredible tribute to Dave. I think both of your willingness to dig into some of this history and the way you think about these crucial issues. Thank you so much. And I am going to throw it to my brother Eric here to kind of wrap us up for the night.
Bye-bye, Nora.
Yeah, thank you. That was, I have to admit, when we put this thing together and we put Bruce Springsteen and Nona Hendryx on the same bill, we knew it was going to be great. We didn't know it was going to be that great. That was just a joy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dave, for giving us something to come together around. And thanks, everyone. We kick things off on next weekend, next Friday night, with the man himself, Dave Marsh, in conversation with Daniel Wolf. So join us for that if you can.
I'll be in touch.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.